Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guests, Damien Caldwell, CEO of ASG National, and Tom Stebbins, Executive Director of Lawsuit Reform Alliance New York. Our episode today is focused on identifying the who, what, and where leading to the IFraud Foundation. For more information on this episode and others, please check out the Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com.
Welcome to the Building Bite podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you'll hear from the experts about key topics that will help you be successful. I'm Chris Epps, Vice President at Proactive, and I'm joined here with my co-host, Mike Diercksen, our Manager of Marketing and Business Development. We welcome our guests today, Damien Caldwell and Tom Stebbins. Damien returns to the show for a second time and is co-founder and CEO of ASG National. And Tom joins us for the first time as the Executive Director of Lawsuit Reform Alliance of New York. Damien, Tom, how are you gentlemen this afternoon?
Good.
Excellent. Great to be with you.
Wonderful. Mike, how about yourself?
Doing good, Chris. Excited to kick off this good topic.
As am I. Very topical and relevant at the moment, and such a pleasure to have you guys on the show. Definitely appreciate it. Before we dive in, I was hoping you guys could give our listeners a little bit of insight on your career path and your background and really what led you guys to where you are today. Damien, since you're our returning guest, I'll start off with you. If you could refresh the audience a little bit on how you got to where you are with ASG.
Yeah, stumbled into the property and casualty industry about 25 years ago now. I was working in a legal department and looking for a job closer to home, and fell into an ancillary services company with IMEs. And then my career just evolved over the years from IMEs to claims. And then eventually, 10 years ago, we founded a technology company, which was ASG National, and we provide technology solutions for the industry now. Over that course, having been involved in claims in the insurance industry, I became the president for the Long Island Claims Association, which is kind of how we ended up on this track here, meeting Tom and starting IFraud.
Fantastic. And Tom, how about yourself?
Yeah, so my job before I took the reins of the Lawsuit Reform Alliance was developing commercial scale wind farms for Goldman Sachs. So I am very familiar with building. I'm very familiar with construction. And what happened to me, and where I really found religion on the insurance issue, is that I had two major projects that I was developing, one in New York and one in Pennsylvania. And they were 30 miles away from each other. And the insurance costs on my New York project was 5 times that of the insurance costs on my Pennsylvania project. And I realized something is massively wrong here, because these are just a few exits away on the highway. We're going to be using the same contractors. We're going to be using the same subs, the same stagers, the same gravel pits, for God's sake. And yet the insurance cost was just so markedly different. And I learned that it was the laws that were governing New York rather than the laws that were governing Pennsylvania that was driving up these costs. And so when I was approached about this issue, about really legal reform, somebody said, well, you probably wouldn't be interested in that. You're a big lefty building wind farms, used to work for PBS, like you don't have any interest in legal reform. And I said, well, I actually do. I think this is really hindering development. And I saw it by sending a $200 million wind farm to Pennsylvania rather than my home state of New York.
Tom, I'm glad you actually explained that connection, because Goldman Sachs wind farms to insurance and lawsuit reform was, probably a jump that needs to be explained. But when you put it all together, it makes sense.
It was actually at a children's party. So I'm literally eating like supermarket sheet cake, telling somebody like, I'd be interested in some legal reform for wind farms, of all things.
Tom, we, for the most part, we all fall into insurance one way or another, but that is a first for me. I hadn't seen that, Goldman Sachs to insurance before. So welcome to the team.
Yeah, there you go.
But guys,
You're in it for life.
Yeah, exactly. It's once you're in, you can't get out. But no, thank you both so much for joining us today. We're really excited for the topic. And as you kind of maybe heard from the top there, but the topic today is identifying the who, the what, and the where, leading to the IFraud Foundation. So for some of our listeners who may not know, there's been some seismic activity in the insurance industry, specifically within workers' compensation, especially in New York City. Tom, if you would, could you give our audience kind of a brief overview of the what exactly has been going on and how that led you and Damien to create the IFraud Foundation?
Yeah, so about a year ago, we started to uncover fraud rings that were really unprecedented. And we understood that they have been existing for a long time. And the scheme works like this. They recruit migrants, generally through nonprofits that are designed, frankly, to protect, house, feed these migrants. They recruit the migrants, and then they teach them how to stage accidents. Construction accidents, right? And so they stage these construction accidents. They make sure that nobody sees it. They make sure that they have all the things that they need to provide to create a fraudulent accident. They run them through phony imaging, phony physical therapy, and then they give them very real spinal fusions. And they do that so that they can show these people with their back flayed open to a jury. And if you've never seen it, it is horrible. And what obviously happens is these juries just give them whatever they need because the images are so awful. But the problem is we've discovered is that many of these cases and many of these lawsuits and many of these accidents are completely fraudulent. There was some great reporting by WABC on this, where they just show people showing up to job sites and literally just sitting down and then saying, oh, I fell or something fell on me. And then they can't barely get into the ambulance 2 seconds later. And then they go through these entirely fraudulent rings. And what's happened is that a company called Tradesman Insurance, which I believe is based out of Poughkeepsie, New York, they filed a RICO case, a Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act, against the perpetrators of these fraud rings. And it's not the migrants, really. It's these, frankly, organized crime rings that include lawyers, doctors, imaging companies, like I said, physical therapy companies, nonprofits. They're all in it. And then they also have these lending components. So they lend the migrants money at these usurious rates so that they can be sure that after the migrant gets their back surgery and wins their case, they actually owe all the money back. So it's terrible, but really a lot of the people that are staging these accidents are in many cases victims. In many cases, they are migrants, and they're staging the accidents is the payment that they are making to a coyote, who is the name of the person that gets these people across the border. So the organized crime rings, there's some Russians, there's MS-13. They get these people recruited in wherever they're from, Honduras, Venezuela, El Salvador. They bring them up. And then as payment for that, they have to stage these accidents and get these surgeries. And so since the first case dropped, I believe we have over 600 witdraws of cases now, as these crime rings, frankly, are starting to withdraw, and the lawyers and the doctors and the people who have, you wouldn't think are part of these organized crime rings start to step away, saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea that any of this was fraudulent. And it used to be, frankly, that the defense was letting them go. Don't let the door hit you out on the way out. The case is over. Bye. See you later. And now they're realizing it seems like we're actually letting a lot of the perpetrators go here, the lawyers and the doctors, and we shouldn't. We need to file objections. And that's one thing we've seen lately is the defense community has been filing objections to these withdrawals, making sure that the lawyers who were pretending like they had no idea what was going on don't just get away without some sort of investigation and some sort of discovery. So that was a long answer, but I know we're on a podcast. I know I got a little more time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good to get the full scope of it, right? There's so much. So when we talk about the what, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. And Damien, just real quick, anything to add on your end, or?
No, that was pretty thorough.
Agreed. Well, it's certainly, as you mentioned, tradesmen kind of started this process, Tom, and pulled on that thread, and what what an enormous thread to have pulled. And it seems to really have created that call to action for you too, right? So, Damien, can you walk us through how you and Tom got together to form the IFraud Foundation, right? How does someone from Long Island Claims Association get involved with the legal reform in order to create the who and what you're looking to involve in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny. It started earlier last year. We did at Long Island Claims Association. We conducted a seminar on fraud, and in that audience were a lot of our construction members. One of them being the New York City School Construction Authority. And during the dialogue, we started talking about plaintiffs' bar and how the plaintiffs' counsel has so much information that they share amongst each other when they're just fighting these cases against the companies. That we're like, we don't really do anything like that on our end. As an industry as a whole, on the defense side for the employers and carriers, we're not very good at sharing data amongst each other. So we ended up taking that conversation offline and having the discussion of, let's get a group of like-minded risk managers and see what they think about, are we willing to do this? Can we start collaborating with each other and sharing data to take this to do something meaningful? And it was just yes across the board. Every risk manager we spoke to, especially on the construction side, because New York construction is ground zero for this, they were like, we are all on board. We will share everything we can. And then Tom, a year before that, started doing legal updates for us at Leica. So it just so happens right around that same time, our next presentation was Tom. And him and I started communicating about this. And coincidentally, his group had been talking about doing something like this as well. So, that kind of brought the two forces together. We set up an advisory committee with, Tully Construction, L&M, municipals as well. So we've got, the Port Authority in New York and Jersey. And we had these conversations, and it was decided that, we can't do this as a, offshoot of any of one of our organizations, that we needed to create a new 501c, run it from there. And then the other consensus from the organization was as well that, they don't want to share data with any for-profit entities, and they don't want to control it by one attorney's office or one brokerage. So, we started the 501, and it's just taken on a life of its own. And that was I think we only incorporated IFraud in October.
In October.
So we are really at the infancy stages of this.
And we also decided to start this in large part because we saw what cooperation did already, right? After tradesmen happened, a lot of the employers got together and said, hey, do you know this law firm, or do you know this guy, or do you know this place? And they started to share a little bit of information, and they started to find out things like, 45 people who all live at the same 2-bedroom apartment, who all had catastrophic construction injuries that required spinal fusions. That's insane, right? Like that
Right.
is, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's not happening, right? First of all, you can't fit 45 people in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. But second of all, the idea that all of them would have catastrophic construction injuries requiring surgeries. And then we started to look, we started to share, and we started to see more and more of what we've started to call these hotbed addresses that have over 10 people who are claiming that they had catastrophic construction injuries that required surgeries. The odds of that are just so unlikely that it just points to fraud. It is not just one red flag. It is a red flag factory of fraud, and that was just in the most rudimentary information sharing. And that's when Damien and I decided, what if we started to really share information? What if we started to move from this kind of string and cans communication up to, notes, and then to phones, and then to the internet? Like, what if we really started to make this communication more serious? And that's what we're doing right now. And it's necessary because a lot of these fraudsters, they're not going to make the same mistake of having all the same people at the same address. They're not going to do that again. So we need to get ahead of it. And that's what the IFraud Foundation is all about.
There's so much data collaboratively that is there that we're not using. So just take the latest RICO suit that tradesmen filed with Ionian. And when we talk about that collaboration, which is kind of like the foundation of the organization, that's what we're aiming for. That was the first suit filed by 2 carriers together. So having a conversation with one of our legal subcommittee members, turns out that he just remembered another case that he was on from years ago that wasn't even construction. It was a staged auto accident with the same medical players and attorney firms that were involved in this RICO suit. So that's just off of memory. Imagine the power that we have and what we could do as an industry if we have all of that data together, at a glance.
Yeah, I mean, data is so powerful, but you have to use it, right? It's good to collect it, but you have to use it in a meaningful way. And I mean, just circling back to something we said in the past. So, offline, Tom, you had mentioned that while there's 600 cases withdrawn with the spinal fusion, the average payout is about 1.5 million per spinal fusion. So you're talking $900 million in damages being taken from the docket. The question kind of then goes, that's some real money. How much has been paid out going back? I'm sure we'd find out years from now when you can really do all this with the data approach. But at the same time, how does that impact the New York market, right? Because these insurance premiums are going to reflect the damages and the loss runs that you're having, and it just snowballs, right? It becomes such a bigger issue.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mike. And you think about how many, schools that we could build for $900 million, how much
Right.
affordable housing we could build for $900 million, right? As you
Right.
said, 900 million is real money. And
That's real money.
that is just a small taste of what I think we can do once we start sharing this information. So yeah, we're really excited, and we really do believe that it can start saving everybody quite a bit of money. But to your point about how much has been paid, I asked a carrier who I'd rather not name, how many cases do you have with these same fact patterns, right? With the same fact patterns that we're seeing as alleged frauds in these suits. And so that's, injuries that nobody saw, same imaging companies, same surgeons, the spinal fusions, and they said 7,000. And that was just on their books, right? So 7,000, you take that and you multiply that by 1.5 million, and you're now in the tens of billions of dollars, right? It's unprecedented. It may be one of the largest frauds if everything comes out the way we think it is. It's maybe one of the largest frauds that's ever been perpetrated in the history of this country.
And think about the impact that has, not just on the carriers, but economically. People don't realize the trickle down effect that this has. So New York is 3 times the cost for insurance that any of our neighboring states are. So that trickles down to your rent that you're paying. When you're talking about 13% on average is the cost for insurance on any construction job. That has to come from somewhere. So you and I are paying that on the day-to-day. That's the insurance. That's what we pay in our rent increases, our auto insurance. We've all seen it happening over the last year where all of our rates are going up. And then not to mention the part of, like, from our general contractor perspectives, there's a lot of these projects, especially our union projects, that have MWBE requirements that have to be in on our, and they can't afford insurance. So now our developers are having trouble meeting their MWB requirements because these smaller contractors, these subs, can't afford to just pay those 15% insurance premium. So it really is having an economic impact on our state, especially overall. And then from
And as Damien mentioned, it's more than just construction, right? It's auto as well. Uber filed a RICO lawsuit just last week, alleging a similar pattern, a similar crime ring of fraud. And so we've also seen American Transit Insurance file a RICO alleging this same fraud. And many of your listeners might have seen that video where somebody on the Belt Parkway cuts somebody off, puts the car into reverse, and slams right into them. And then 5 people stumble out of the car holding their necks. They call their attorney or surgeon right away, and they backed into the car in front of them, right? Those are all fraud rings, and those are all, we believe, many of the same perpetrators.
Yeah, the pervasiveness and the magnitude and the numbers you're talking in the tens of billions with just what you're pulling out with a handful of carriers, just staggering figures. And it sounds like you guys are just starting to pull that thread, and there's more out there. So for members of our audience who I think would be very interested in finding out more and potentially contributing, if they want to get involved or learn more, where can they do so? What's the best way for them to get involved? Is it reaching out to you both, or Tom? I'd ask you, what's the best way for maybe some of our carrier listeners to take a step towards, getting involved in that process?
Yeah, reach out to us. First and foremost, go to ifraud.org, right? It's real simple, ifraud.org, and you can sign up for one of our committees. This is a nonprofit model. So we are building this from the ground up with the support and the participation from people like your listeners. We want them to be involved. And Damien and I have had meetings with defense counsel, risk managers, insurance professionals, all sorts of different people across the construction insurance spectrum, and they all want to get involved. The response has been overwhelming, and there's still room at the table because the more we have in terms of data, the better we can fight this fraud.
Damien, how about you? Anything to supplement
no,
there?
that
I
is,
mean, it sounds
I'll
like
just remember what Tom said. Participation is key here, and the whole philosophy of the foundation from day one is that it has to be a collaborative effort. Everyone needs to be having a seat at that table because it's not going to work otherwise. And we're seeing the success that's happening with that collaboration, and we want that. Or the way our boards are going to be structured, the way the foundation is structured, is to have members from our carriers, our brokers, our defense counsels, our employers, all of us sitting at the table, because it's not just about the data. Listen, that's a huge piece, right? So the data is how we're going to get this. That's the tool, but the collaboration amongst these stakeholders is the most important part. And having us be able to sit down at a round table and come up with these ideas and how can we approach this. And to Tom's point earlier, these conversations are happening now. I've spoken to so many risk managers where, week one, they were like, yeah, our problems are a little different. By week 3, they're reaching out to their fellow developers to say, hey, you guys have the same problems. Can we get together and fight this jointly? And that's what we're looking to create, a unified voice to not only, address and create innovative solutions to help tackle fraud, but from a legislative perspective. We're facing bills that are in legislature that are being turned down. Tom can speak to it a little bit more eloquently, but this right now, staged auto accidents is a felony. Staged construction accidents are not. Why? So that bill's been sitting there, and we need a powerful voice behind us to come out and help the government and help our understand that we need to make these changes and push it through.
And our hope is that this tool is helpful for everyone, right? Defense counsel may have certain needs that they need to ferret out fraud. Claims professionals may have certain things that they need to ferret out fraud. And so the reason that we are diverse across the industry by design is to make sure that everybody that has an involvement in a claim is getting the tools that they need to root out fraud.
Yeah, guys, it's a common through line. This is a topic we really have never covered on the show before, but it doesn't matter. The industry as a whole, as people, right? I think the common through line is communication. Effective communication solves problems, and whether the problems be pre-qualifying a subcontractor or identifying, patterns of fraud, communication's key. So definitely thank you so much for sharing that. And guys, like we talked about a lot of things today. There's a lot of big eye-popping numbers. For our audience, one thing we like to do is leave them with 3 key takeaways. So if you were a stakeholder, a broker, a carrier, contractor working in this industry, if you're listening to today's episode, what are the 3 things you want to leave them with after hearing today?
Yeah, I think the answer is clear. I mean, number one, there is a massive amount of fraud happening in construction right now. That's number one. Number two, this was caused and this happened essentially because of a lack of collaboration amongst our industry. And third, there is a way to solve that. We can collaborate and we can ferret out this fraud that is costing all of us billions of dollars. I don't know a single contractor who has not had some BS claim that they're pretty sure was shady that their insurance company paid out anyway. And I know that's true across the board for all sorts of industries. My brother does home care. He has the same thing. People show up one day, first day on the job, they've already injured themselves and are filing a claim, right? A lot of that is fraud, and we can root that out if we work together.
And Tom, how about an action item to follow that? I know you talked about it. Damien spoke on a couple of ways people can get involved. If our listeners are looking to get involved or share data or collaborate with your organization, kind of beyond going to the website and contacting you guys, like what should they be asking for? How could they get involved? Are there, subcommittees? How can they contribute?
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, there is the contributing data and contributing your time and energy, but we're going to need people to contribute their finances, right? And if you think about one of these claims being $1.5 million on average, the subscription fee that we're looking for is nominal, right? It barely holds up to even a fraction of a claim. So we're going to need people to also financially support this effort, in addition to providing data and their time and their creativity and their collaboration.
Always very important for any nonprofit, particularly getting started, and two, given just the scale and the magnitude of what you guys are trying to attack here. So appreciate you putting that out there. Also, before we go, usually like to hit our guests with a couple of rapid fire questions. And Damien, maybe I'll toss the first one up to you. In terms of this collaborative effort, do you see an opportunity for data sharing and contribution across other lines beyond workers' comp? I mean, I know you talked about like auto and kind of addressed that, but it seems like there's just seems to be a whole lot out there that, if you're financed and funded properly and had lots of resources, that you could go running in 10 different directions, it seems.
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit obviously is where the problems lie the most right now, which is casualty. So workers' comp, but liability, auto, all of those. The specialty markets are different. They have their own nuances, so we're not so much looking at that right now. But it is just a workload. This is not going to be like a Northeast-based. We're looking at a national scope, for these carriers across the board for workers' comp, GL, and auto, because those are the primary areas where we're seeing this.
Yeah, Tom, next one's for you. So we talked about, the industry and like how we need to take back, just transparency and honesty when it comes to these claims, that we understand what's going on here. But what level of transparency do you think is necessary for that, right? We're asking stakeholders to kind of share their data. I mean, is there just a real like come to Jesus type moment that needs to happen industry wide for this to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, we need transparency across companies. It used to be that everybody stood in their own silo with their own data and looked at their own claims, and that was it. Well, that is exactly how the fraud essentially perpetrated outside of each of those silos, outside of each of those walls. We need to open those doors. We need to let sunlight in, and we need to let each other know what's happening, right? Because it's once we do, we can start to really show a little transparency is going to go a long way to showing how much fraud is out there. We've already seen that just with the addresses, right? Just something as rudimentary as addresses, finding out that 47 people live in the same two-bedroom apartment, or rather do not live in the same, but just that little rudimentary bit of sunlight provided so much savings and so much relief to the industry. Imagine what just a little bit more can do. So we need to, as an industry, start working together and stop just putting up walls to each other. It's not working, and it's exactly why this fraud has been able to perpetuate for so long.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And well, guys, this is the last one's for both of you, and I think it's pretty clear you're both passionate about the topic through the conversation we've had today. But Damien, I'll kick it off to you first. I mean, what makes you the most excited about this work you're doing right now with the IFraud?
This is one of those things where you're talking about a seismic shift in the industry. If we pull this off, and I say if, but I'm very confident we're going to pull this off because the level of support here is tremendous. But this is really something that is going to change how just the cost tremendously for what our industry is seeing as a whole. So that's
Tom?
really kind of what's motivating me. And then the sense that it's not just, identifying current fraud, we're talking about proactively being able to stop this from happening in the future.
And it's so important that we stop it. I mean, we essentially have people being mutilated for profit. That's what's happening. And so I don't care if you're left, right, or center. That's awful. And the profit is coming from all of us. It is coming in our taxes. It's coming in our auto insurance. It's coming in our housing costs, right? So to me, from a political standpoint, this is just the greatest slam dunk that I could imagine, because you just have people, again, who are being mutilated for profit. and it's costing all of us. Everybody should be focused on trying to fix that.
Agreed. Well, tough transition here, but guys, this is the Building Bite, and that does stand for Building Insurance Technology with the Experts. We do always ask our guests what they're taking a bite out of today. A good food spot for you. So, Damien, if you want to kick us off somewhere off in Long Island.
Well, Damien was the foodie from the last time, so
that's right.
Today we're gonna go with the Ivy. It's an awesome spot in Huntington who has an amazing short rib mac and cheese that is just out of this world. So that's today's spot.
Yeah, and up here in Albany, folks may not know it, but we have some of the best dim sum going. So my family, we like to go out to dim sum pretty much every Sunday. And one of our favorite places is a place called Who's House. Has an unbelievable thing called wonton and spicy flavor. And it is just about as good as it gets. It has some peanut butter, I think, in it. I don't know how it's so good, but it's amazing.
Fantastic, Mike. Put it on the list. We will
just put
chase
it
down
online.
good dim sum. Hey, we'll chase down noodles and soup every time. And guys, thanks again for joining us today. We appreciate you taking time out of the effort to chat with us because we know you're busy. If our listeners want to hook up with you after the podcast airs, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can email getinvolved@ifraud.org. And that will come to either of us, or you can email us each individually. So I'm just dcaldwell@IFraudFoundation.org, and then Tom has the you can tell them your own email address.
Well, you can always find me just on LinkedIn. That's always the best place, and you can also keep on track of me just railing against trial lawyers on in various media hits across the spectrum, and you can find that all on LinkedIn. It's Tom Stebbins at the Lawsuit Reform Alliance of New York.
Perfect. Well, gentlemen, thank you again. We definitely appreciate the time. Good luck in the effort. Something we fully support, bringing that kind of change to the industry and just empowering the collaboration across all the people that you're working with to make that happen. Just a huge endeavor, but very worthwhile. We appreciate it and appreciate you guys taking time out.
Really appreciate you having us.
Yeah. Appreciate you guys helping us get the message out.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.